Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Professional development chair, but I can be your personal development chair if you need to. Just let me know. Sorry, start over just a little bit. We'll get the slideshow going here with a little clicker, like for Ventries to pull it up. Fires and floods. That's our topic today, as you're obviously aware. Considering that that's been a pretty dramatic situation that we've been in these last few months, it does not seem to be going anywhere. As realtors, affiliates, we are advocates for our clients and our community, so we need to be prepared as best as we can so we can better prepare our clients and community. So with the pressing today of things that are going on, we've got some great speakers. I have suckered my husband here to come up and talk about the fires. We'll have Lucinda follow as well. And Scott will have you bring him home towards the end of it today. So we'll have some questions after each panelist comes up here and talks, each speaker. And with that, also before we get in, I just want to make sure you guys are aware of all the different wellness programs that we have, educational opportunities, industry insight. We're trying to make sure that you've got relevant, up-to-date information on everything. So please go to NAZRealtor.com calendar and find out what's coming up. The whole rest of the month of September is full of great things. We've got wellness. We're going to have two of our experts coming in, Jen and Robin, to talk about movement, and we're going to go for a hike at Buffalo Park. And then we also have a September is actually Realtor Safety Awareness Month, in case you didn't know. So our focus is also going to be on safety, protecting yourselves. And we will have a self-defense class. Scott Higgins here has created for us. So check out that, register for those things, how to protect yourself. We'll also have a safety awareness class with John Paxton from the Coconino County Sheriff's Department to come over and just be aware of your surroundings, how to notice things, how to get out of situations, how to protect yourself, and actually how to prevent possible issues that could compromise your safety. So please check out those things. We've got education as well. First speaker, like I said, is my husband, Victor Morfin, and he's going to be embarrassed. I insisted I put this up there because I think it's important for you to know where the background is coming from. Obviously very proud of my hubby. 33 years in this business of fighting fire. He was a former smoke jumper, hotshot squad leader, incident commander for Type 3 fires, district and forest fuel specialist, and currently works for the region, Southwest region, as the fuel specialist. So he likes fire a little bit. He also obtained his bachelor's in science forestry and his master's in fire ecology here at NAU. So not only do we have experience from him jumping out of the sky, boots on the ground, but also in the classroom, and has been representing Flagstaff and Northern Arizona for quite some time, protecting the community and dealing with fire, from wildfires to prescribed fires. And then, of course, only a man which would purposely jump out of a perfectly good airplane would be somebody that could put up with me. So this is the next speaker that we have for you. Please welcome my husband, Victor Morfin.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. As with a lot of industries, firefighting and fuels management is really about the people. This comes from a photo of a crew I worked with a long time ago in the mid-90s along the Boise River in the Greedo hotshots. And about half of these folks, well, a little over half of these folks are still fighting fire today. Going to talk to you about wildfires generally around Flagstaff specifically. My new role, I just started at the regional office about last week. So this is new to me. Prior to that, though, for the last 13, 14 years, I was a forest fuel specialist here on the Coconino National Forest. And then the 10 years prior, I was next door on the Skydive National Forest out of Williams, Arizona. And the thing that separates my job from a lot of the others in the agency is that I tend to focus on prescribed fire fuels management. We all fight fire. These folks in these hard hats, we're really popular in the summer. There's, we go through town. Everyone else is leaving. We're coming in. They put up signs, "Thank you, firefighters." But for some reason, 6 months later, when we're out burning, prescribed burning, or doing other activities, for the betterment of all, we tend to get flipped off and called names and approached a little bit differently because we're putting smoke in the air. And some folks don't understand why we're doing that, but we're trying to do good things. So I bring that up, and this was at the Hart Prairie prescribed fire that we had a few years ago. As you can see, that's in front of the peaks, southwest of the peaks. So the reason that's there, so if we have a fire running towards the peaks, there's something in the way of it. And I'll get into more of that here in a bit. That's why I chose this photo. Sorry that this is so washed out. Hopefully you can get the idea here, but the reason I put this up is because the forest you see out in your backyards today is not the forest that were here 100 years ago, 150 years ago. The folks that showed up here in the 1870s, they said the grass was belly high to a horse. So in addition to having a lot less trees, large open park-like stands, the grass was belly high to a horse. Obviously, you don't see that anymore. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not really going to get into how we got here. But it started with overgrazing, selective tree harvesting, and then fighting fire aggressively. But the fighting fire was actually the last one in the chain of events. Because most people just think of that part of it, fire suppression being the source of the problem. And it is a part of the problem. But back in the day, there were dozens of trees per acre, maybe 20, 30. And nowadays, several hundred, 500 trees per acre, thousands of trees per acre. So that forest outside your backyard is not what should be there. And it's not sustainable. This is actually a photo series taken over time from the same spot. It's hard to tell once it's overgrown, but if you look, closer to the turn of the previous century, you see remnants of that large open park-like structure. But you also see all the baby trees coming in, and these little trees turned into these trees. And then in 2008, by 2008, roughly 70 years after that one, you can't even recognize the forest, right? And then unfortunately, between these two photos, the wildfire came in and set, I don't know if I'd say destroyed this forest, but certainly set it back. It may never come back again. And I would just point out that had this condition been around in 2010, 2012, before this fire, you can imagine it would have looked different. It probably just would have burned, killed these smaller trees, left big old growth trees, and it would have just cleaned up the ecosystem versus taking it out. In January of this year, the chief of the U.S. Forest Service declared a wildfire crisis. This was a long time coming. But this could be anywhere Western USA. And the key here is the impacts to community, obviously. These wildfires no longer just burn up woods and burn up forests. Now they take out communities. And we see traveling all over the West in the summer, you see scenes like this constant. Like I said, streams of cars coming out, we're coming in, and not a lot left behind sometimes. And I have another slide like this when I get into how to protect your home that I can play off of this and show you why I chose this slide. Okay, but around here in Flagstaff, it really is when, not if there's going to be a fire. I can't overstate that. A lot of people don't understand that because we haven't lived in an era where we see a lot of fires. Generally speaking, most of you maybe have seen a lot of fire in the last 4 or 5 years. But this has been coming. The fuels have been building up. They have our ecosystems haven't been burning naturally, and this is kind of what the result is. So it's coming. It's not if we're going to have a fire here in Flagstaff. We will. It's when. So I want to be clear on that. And so to illustrate that point, I'll point out that on the Coconino National Forest, we often lead the nation in wildfires per year. We average 300 to 400 fires a year. Most of them you'll never hear about. Most of them aren't on this map because it would just be a series of little red dots. You can barely see them to cover the map. These are the larger fires in that 10-year span. And so I think when you see all these fires, and the colors mean nothing. Sorry about that. I was trying to do something with the colors. Regardless of what you're looking at, it's all wildfire that occurred from 2009 to 2019. And then there's Lower Flagstaff right there. And I point this out. 2 reasons. One, so you can, it illustrates that, yeah, there's a lot of fire in this landscape. And we need to adapt to it. We need to work with fire. We can't continue to, quote unquote, suppress it aggressively. It doesn't work. But the good news here is, except for 4 polygons, all of these fires you see, regardless of color, are all what we call wildfires managed for resource objectives. These are fires that occur less than 5% of the time we can actually do this. It's got to be in the right place, the right day. We have to have the right resources. And it depends on what's going on nationally. Because if all of our crews are committed fighting fire in California, we can't manage a fire, we simply put it out. These fires were not simply put out. We managed them to predefined boundaries. And so I bring this up to as a semi-pat on the back for your local national forest, because by continuing to put fire all over the landscape, it helps reduce the odds that we're going to have that destructive, uncharacteristic wildfire come through and do bad things. There's no guarantee, but it helps by putting fire on the ground. And hopefully, at the end of the presentation, you can ask questions if stuff doesn't make sense. This is from the Museum Fire 2019. You may recall that. And it's just another illustration of it. It's not if, it's when. This photo was taken from town when that fire first started in 2019, the museum fire. Here's a fire, a picture from last year, the pipeline fire. When it comes to the pipeline fire and the, the one before the tunnel fire, I missed both of those fires because I was in New Mexico on another large fire called the Calf Canyon fire. At the time, it was the largest fire in New Mexico history, but we got beat this summer by another fire. Every year, it seems like we have these unprecedented record-breaking fires. It's just bigger and badder every year, it seems. But anyways, I missed both of these events here in Flagstaff because I was committed to fires in New Mexico. That were a lot larger and a lot more complex than these fires.
Yeah. And that's how you put out a fire.
Magic just disappeared. While we're working on that, is there any questions over the few slides that I got into? And I'll also mention that I am going to get towards later in the presentation, get to things we can do to protect our homes, because I know that's really what you're interested in with your clients and maybe yourself. But I need to build a story about what situation we're in now and talk about fire and a little bit of fire ecology, because that's key to this whole story. Okay, so there you go, pipeline fire. Melinda took these photos one of the first evenings of the pipeline fire. They're basically at Fort Hill at the interchange, and you can see the glow on the mountain. It was pretty impressive at night up here. And a little something that a lot of folks don't think about, that in a way we kind of got lucky. We dodged a bullet on the pipeline fire, and that was because this tunnel fire occurred a month or two prior. Had the tunnel fire not been here, to be clear, the tunnel fire was an unwanted, unplanned fire. It wasn't a good thing. It burned up houses. It did a lot of bad things. So I'm not here to defend the tunnel fire, but I am here to say that had the tunnel fire not been here, and the pipeline fire had started 2 months later when it was hotter, drier, and windier, it would have been a whole different ballgame. And all these structures that, for the most part, we were able to pick up and save, so to speak, during the tunnel. That would have been, the pipeline would have just blown through all this stuff. And we wouldn't have had anything to work with to anchor off of to try to contain the pipeline fire. And I could get into more of that if you have specific questions, but that's an interesting little piece that some people didn't really get with all the fires that were going on this summer. Okay, so like I said, ponderosa pine evolved with fire. Now, this is something that's been occurring for thousands of years. So we get here 100, 130 years, obviously it's a snapshot in time of super dense forests that seem to be burning crazily and destroying things in its path. Well, that story backs up to here. Back when we had frequent fire, those fires would come and clean up the ecosystem and turn over nutrients and allow sunlight to the floor and promote grass and do a lot of good things. We stopped that cycle about 140 years ago, long before we were effectively fighting, suppressing wildfires. So an analogy I would use is that just like y'all get sick maybe once or twice a year or every other year, and that helps your immune system, these ecosystems need fire. It's part of the equation. Chainsaws aren't a surrogate, cattle aren't a surrogate, goats, it's fire. That's what the chemical process, that's what turns over nutrients, and that's what these forests need. So for decades, we've used the approach of overwhelming force. A good example is the Boeing 737 that a lot of folks like and think is kind of the answer to where we're going. It's not. When I go on fires in the summer anymore, we're always on defense. We're not catching the fire, so to speak, as much as we're getting people out of the way and trying to keep people safe. It's all about life property now. Very rarely do we get the opportunity to poke a fire, catch a fire. I'm not saying we don't. It doesn't happen, but I'm saying that the environment we're in now, we're just trying to get people out of the way and run smooth evacuations, not get people hurt. And so how we fight fire often is in the off season. And this is an example of a prescribed fire. So by putting fire on the ground and trying to put fire back in the ecosystem like the map I showed you before, that's the most effective way. Now don't get me wrong, we're doing this, and then of course if we get a lightning strike or someone who burns our toilet paper and a fire is running in the community, we drop over to it and we react to that. And we're pretty dang successful in protecting houses and structures, but it all starts way in advance of that. And the odds are stacked up against us if we don't have fire in the ecosystem. We just allow these schools to build over time. So here's a little bit of example of a prescribed fire. And you can see the deal. I'm not going to read that stuff to you, but I will say that note, after a prescribed fire, a lot of folks don't like this. They don't like that brown, right? It looks ugly. I moved here for green trees, not to see a bunch of brown on my back door. And I understand that, and I get that. I will say though, when the fire does come, in this area where all that brown is now gone, there's no more fuel, this is sustainable. That is an area that if we get a wildfire in there, we can probably protect the community. If we get a wildfire in some of these dense overgrown areas, we may be just getting you out of the way. And I'm speaking in real generalities, as you know, every fire is different. There's lots of variables, but this is why we push prescribed fires so hard. This is the same type of thing here locally. You can see this example. And if you go to the website, ERI, and you slide this back and forth, you can see the pre and the post. And in the pre, 100 years ago, there really weren't a lot of trees. These were primarily grasslands with some large scattered trees, generally in the drainages and on slopes and mountains. Now you can see it's pretty much solid trees anywhere you go in northern Arizona, with the exception of some prairies and some parks. It's been inundated by trees, and you see the same thing over in this photo, obviously. Not a lot of trees, a lot of grasslands, becoming dense, overgrown. Nothing new here, so I don't want to beat this up. I will point out, though, this is very important, getting grass back in the ecosystem. When we talk about functionality, what these forests do for us is they filter water. Obviously, we get all our water from the peaks and from Morfin Mountain, the two watersheds that feed into Lake Mary and pump down into Flagstaff from Interbasin. If you go to your backyard in unrestored forest, you see this mass of ponderosa pine needles. No biodiversity, it's dead sticks. Not a lot of good comes from dead sticks. But if you burn that stuff, you can get grass. And you can get everything that comes from that, butterflies, songbirds, etc. All the biodiversity that goes with that. This is a photo of Mormon Lake, taken from FH3, Lake Mary Road. Bunch of elk in the middle. And I just want to point that out because it's really that grass that starts that whole food web, all the way up to megafauna. You've got to have the grass. That's the baseline. Things don't grow on dirt or pine needles. You won't get biodiversity that way. And this all relates, I'm talking about fire hazard, and that's what a lot of folks are really preoccupied with. But the reality is this goes to everything. Wildlife, if you're into wildlife, if you recreate the national forest, you won't have a national forest with birds and all this stuff if you don't have that functionality. So it all relates. We focus on fire risk and hazard, but it's really much more than that. It's about biodiversity and recreation. If you grow cattle, you want these fires because you want grass. So any business you have in the woods, you run a ski resort, fire promotes that health and that sustainability, that functionality. Just another deal with prescribed fire. Obviously, you see brown there. That's what folks don't like, but it is part of the equation. And in a year or two, all that brown will be gone and be on the forest floor. Same thing there. No one likes to smoke. Look, the difference in smoke from a prescribed fire and what we deal with on wildfires is dramatic. You know, the forest and wood have a lot of bad stuff in it, benzenes, stuff that's not good for you. I know I've lost lung function. A lot of folks I work with have lost lung function over the years by working and sleeping in this, in the West. But when you get into those environments like I showed you before where houses burn, and you think about couches burning, that wood shed in the back that has who knows what, right? Paint thinners and everything. All that stuff burns when we go to those wildfires. Vehicles, houses, a lot of bad stuff. So I get that this isn't good for you, wood smoke, but keep in mind what kind of smoke you're going to have if you don't do this. Getting towards the end here, this is a picture of Sedona. Ted Grissom from Sedona took this of the 2014 slide fire. See the peaks in the background. And just how that smoke drains down these drainages. Whether it's from a wildfire or prescribed fire, it's the same story. Other than on wildfires, it does tend to be more toxic and more condensed. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the Forest Restoration Initiative. That's the initiative here in the Southwest area that is of national significance. It's the Coconino National, Kaibab National, Tonto National, and Apache Sitgreaves National Forest have undertaken accelerated restoration. And so when you hear forefront, that's what it's about. Obviously, my focus areas with that is prescribed burning and thinning mechanical timber sales, that sort of thing. And managing fires and resource objectives is not on here, but that's a big part of it too. Any way we can get fire back into the ecosystem. A little bit of raw. If you live in the Southwest, Region 3 is what we call it. The Coconino does lead the region. All 11 forests are behind us in terms of average treatment of prescribed fires in the Southwest. So if you don't like smoke, this is bad for you. But if you like sustainable forests, water, not losing houses, or at least losing less houses, this is the ticket, is by actively managing that forest. Okay, back to this slide. And I want to say that it's really about a lot more than protecting your home or your client's home. And this is a good illustration because often those frontline houses, if you're up against a forest that hasn't been actively managed, hasn't been prescribed fire, I can almost guarantee you that frontline of houses, it's going to go when the forest burns. If you're fortunate enough to be in the second or third row, you might have a little bit more survivability. But I brought this up because a lot of folks think if you do fire-wise and you do your part, that you're going to be okay. And you may. And I'm not discouraging people to not do fire-wise. I'm going to promote that. I have the site here. But I think it's important that you understand that your home survival is often dependent on your neighbor or your neighbors or your neighboring forest. Because these are large events that burn. It's not simply a little wildfire that comes through. The flame front may be miles or miles long. So it really is, in backing up and looking at your community from this view is obviously different than we're used to. But that's why I chose this photo. So I think there's a couple things we can do in the community. And one, and I'm a little biased, but I say support your local national forest or park or whatever it is that does this work. Because if they don't do this work, if they don't manage wildfires for research objectives like this, instead of just putting it out, we chose to manage this fire and burn the whole thing. It's in a better place now. But if you don't do that, you're missing a big part of the equation. And then regardless, you want to protect your home and encourage your neighbors and your HOA and others to protect their home because your home actually depends on their success also. It's all interrelated. This is the way some fire folks, think of fire and smoke. That you're really, it's a premium you're paying forward. And if you don't have smoke from prescribed fires, it's good for now, but there'll come a time when that payment's going to become due. Because these forests are going to burn, I guarantee it. We've seen it all over the West. Okay, I did give you guys some resources, or Melinda will pass those on to you, some references, and one of them is the FireWise site. I'm not going to bore you and read this stuff, but generally speaking, the guidance there is we pull flammable stuff away from our houses, check our gutters, and I would point out when I was in New Mexico just this summer on one of the fires, There were a lot of firewise efforts, and they are helpful. You can sometimes look at the neighborhoods, and you can see as the fire's coming in, you know, that's a loser, that's a loser. This one may stay. I mean, and when we're triaging houses, just like you would in an ER, that's often how we're triaging. We're passing some houses because we know they're not savable. But I found that folks would do a lot of this stuff, and then they would make the mistake of having a little bit of mulch, a flower bed or something right up against their house. And we could knock down the flame front, we could break up their fuel wood piles, and then we'd go off shift and we'd come back the next day and the fire had got into the mulch and creeped its way up to the deck and burned the house down. And it was very, I'm searching for the right word, but it's very unfortunate because they've done a lot of work, but they missed a small little thing. Fire will surprise you as it moves around. Path of least resistance. Okay, I have a couple of resources I just put in the slideshow in case you want access to this later. And after this presentation, I'm going to go to that RMA dashboard, the first one, and just poke around in there and show you some tools that you can look around Flagstaff in your neighborhoods to get an idea of volatility, flammability, and fire danger. Okay, that is it. Oh, yes, sir.
I have a question for you. And it's really not an average question, but annually, how many fires in Coconino National Forest are man-caused and how many are caused by nature?
Yeah, gotcha. Good question. Like I said, we average 300 to 400 fires a year, almost right down the middle, 50-50. We get a lot of lightning fires, about 150, 200, and we get about 150, 200 human-caused fires. And I would note too that a lot of those we don't count. If someone goes camping and they leave their fire smoldering and it doesn't get out of the pit, it doesn't threaten anything, we don't count that. But if it gets out of the pit and it starts moving, then we count that. So about half of the fires are human caused. Big problem. Yes, sir. Gary.
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. So the four most recent fires we've had up on the San Francisco streets, that acreage is now pretty much contiguous now, isn't it? Like going back as far as the Schultz, and I think what you had up here was maybe from 19 or something, but so we have the Schultz, we have the museum, the tunnel, and pipeline, and they're almost completely, so not on here is the Schultz and the museum, right? True. And museum was caused by the folks were actually hired as subcontractors.
It was.
Yep. For us. I think we're at about 90,000 acres now. About that.
Of those four fires combined.
So my question is, and by the way, you guys, you can cause smoke in my neighborhood. I think everybody here, we appreciate you guys. But my difficulty is with the upper level management and making decisions to made specific to law enforcement. I'm in the forest about 3 times a week up northwest, west of typically up Chilton Creek and west of there. Except of course it's closed as far as you know. And then just kidding. But it seems like there are people, mostly transients, that are into the forest and they pretty much live there year round. And I don't see law enforcement ever rousting people out, or I know people that are spotting fires, campfires up on whether the forest is closed or not, there's campfires up on the side of the mountain. So specific to that kind of a question, is there any change that's going to be happening when it comes to law enforcement? Because I think that's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, definitely. We have a law enforcement issue, as you said. I point out, on our forest, we're about 2 million acres, and we have 5 or 6 law enforcement officers, and that's actually a lot. The guy down next door has 2. So
then I have a suggestion.
Yeah, no, we definitely are understaffed, and the reality of trying to enforce laws on your national forest, 2 million acres with 5 or 6 law enforcement officers when we're fully staffed is a challenge and it's a problem. And I would say that we've done some things like there's no campfires in the city limits. That's been a thing for a while, and they're expanding that to include the peaks. So I don't know where we're at with all that stuff. That's not what I do. But yes, we definitely acknowledge it. And you recall that sometimes the forest is closed, like you said. And when we close a national forest, the peaks is always in that picture. Snowball peaks, that's part of it. Pump House Wash is another. All the high risk areas, we'll close those before we even close the national forest often. But I agree that we have that law enforcement issue. And
well, there are two suggestions. One would be that if you go to Colorado and you spend some time in Colorado, around the busier parts of the resort areas of Colorado, you have to camp only inside a designated space for a certain number of miles now. And I would suggest that for here as well. And I don't understand why it hasn't happened in the past. You're only allowed to camp inside designated spot with a fire ring, and that's it. And then another suggestion, and maybe this is already a thing, is there a volunteer group for community members to be able to help you guys report things? Just I don't want to be citizen on patrol, but at the same time, nothing to do.
We do through Coconino County, we do have a group that helps call in wildfires, report others for having campfires. They help during closures if people are going into areas that are closed. And that's through the county. I can't think of what they're called, but yeah, we have a partnership with the county as our closest ally for trying to deal with some of the issues you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Thank you so much, Vic. How about thanks to the support from all of folks like you, for the tunnel fire victims, we are actually aware that we get a grant from the National Association of Realtors, Realtor Relief Fund, thanks to a great idea from Lisa Paprath and Judy Jackson Platform. They're distributing $4,000 to folks along the fire. So thanks to all of you that donated to that. Without further ado, our next guest is Lucinda Andreani. Why don't we record Scott wait and have questions so that we have time for everybody to speak, and then we'll have a rapid fire session at the end. Thank you so much. How about a hand for Lucinda?
Good afternoon. I'm Lucinda Andreani. I serve as the Flood Control District Administrator, and I'm also Deputy County Manager. And I don't know who ended up with the. Is there another figure? Oh, give me just one second. Okay, she's going to pull up. I'm going to show you a couple videos for those of you that may likely have not been out in the east side of Flagstaff since we had the pipeline fire and seen the horrific flooding. This has been a horrible summer. We have now experienced over 45 flood events, major flood events, and Highway 89's been closed 7 times with 4 partial closures. It's just been a tremendous impact, and certainly we've also seen impacts, and I'll let Scott speak to the 180 corridor, but pretty much every watershed, there's 9 watersheds were burned in total as a result of pipeline. And I'm not going to talk about tunnel because tunnel really didn't affect the flood dynamics, the post-wildfire flooding dynamics. What affects post-wildfire flooding is when it burns on the upper steep slopes, of which it did very violently through the pipeline fire. Reburned a lot of areas he mentioned relative to the Schultz fire, but importantly burned new areas that had not been burned, and very severely because they hadn't burned in over 100 years. A lot of dead and down. And I want to say that something very important to understand, nobody likes taxes, but the Flood Control District Board of Directors this year did raise your Flood Control District tax The explicit purpose for that is to invest over $30 million over 5 years in treatment, forest restoration. Primarily, we want to focus on those very expensive, steeper slopes. You can't do prescribed fire there. A lot of the forests that we look at from this town, yes, you can do prescribed fire, but you can't do that until you get in there and get the dead and down out, and you get out and you thin down those forests, because they have been left for so long and it's in such horrible condition that what we experience today would happen. So we've got to get in there. We've got to get those areas thin. And the best thing that happened for Flagstaff with the pipeline fires, everyone knows it started to run to the west, and then the wind shifted and it ran to the east. And if it had run to the west and burned the west flank of the peaks, which is the upper Rio watershed, or a vast majority of that Rio watershed, a big chunk of the Rio watershed, Rio de Flag, you'd be seeing catastrophic flooding all through Flagstaff, down through Continental right now. That what their experience on the east side would be happening in Flagstaff. So that's our focus. We're hoping the city will join us in that investment. They literally got $11 million out of the federal government to invest in restoration. And we're hoping that they'll partner with us along with the Forest Service. We're working really closely with the Forest Service right now, really pressing them to dedicate resources to get the west side of the peaks thinned. We've got to get that thinned, or there is no Flagstaff. We are looking at horrific conditions, far worse than what we're seeing even on the east side. So, and for some examples in terms of the volume of water, how many people have been to Lee's Ferry, Colorado River in a normal year? Okay, in a normal year, it runs about 9,000, 10,000 CFS, cubic feet per second. We have watersheds now on the east side that are running at 5,000 cubic feet per second, half of what you see at Lee's Ferry. That's what's possible out there. That's what the modeling's showing. So it's a really difficult situation. And with 8 watersheds, let me tell you, we have our hands full in terms of what to do. We've put a tremendous amount of investment. We've now spent over $7 million just in response this summer, and short-term mitigation, sandbags, barriers. We've produced over 900,000, we're getting close to 1 million sandbags. We've placed 4 miles of barrier. Just a tremendous response effort that we mobilized very quickly, because unfortunately monsoon started early this year as well. So it's just been a horrific summer for people out there. And absolutely, is it affecting property values? Yes. I mean, we've estimated at those homes that are at risk, private property that's at risk, it's upwards at risk. The value of that property, not the damage, the value is around $1.3 billion. So there's a lot of value at risk out there, both east and within the city of Flagstaff from the Schultz Creek element of pipeline as well. I want to share a couple of videos with you. This is from a meeting on August 17th. The district co-hosted a meeting with Congressman O'Halloran. We brought in high-level federal representatives from the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Deputy Undersecretary Montano Green was here with us as well. These are some photographs of the devastation, but I want to share a couple of videos here. This is a good slide, though. This is when I talked about, the increase in the flood risk coming as a result of the pipeline fire. Those red bars are the increase in flow. The worst hit corridor is Government Tank, which is the southernmost on that eastern flank. That water comes across, if you know where the APS solar plant is, out on 89, south of Campbell, right there near the East Baptist Church. It winds all the way around. It comes off of Weatherford Canyon, winds all the way around. It's literally 9 miles down to the highway. But we're seeing, the modeling showing over 4,000 CFS as it hits the neighborhood there. That's a lot of water. And the one at the furthest north, Pocky Lennox, was hit very hard. But all of these have seen, we're looking at 7 to 22 times the increase in floodwater since 2016 post Schultz. So I wanted to share, you know what I think I'm going to need. Do you have a, or I can probably just see it should. This is drone flight post. You can see the highways reopened. That's 89. That's the solar APS solar plant. This is the government tank watershed. You can see, you know, that basically all those properties are completely covered with mud and debris. Try this. Okay. It's done that. It's not happening with the videos, but the videos were the good part. So I want to transition. You know, this has been a horrible summer, but one of the things, you know, when we looked at the process that unfolded after Schultz, how many people were here during Schultz? I recognize some faces, people that were here during Schultz. You know, during Schultz, it took us 3 years to get a shovel in the ground. It was tremendous amount of effort went into getting the funding, getting the approvals, you know, getting the National Environmental Policy Act approvals on the National Forest to do work on National Forest. I mean, all of that process took an extensive amount of time. Well, one thing we learned and we used in museum very successfully is people probably have witnessed this year, we haven't had any response within the museum flood area this year. And the district went up and invested about $7 million this last spring, just finished this last spring. Fortunately, just finished it when pipeline started. Finished the on forest and immediately off forest work that we did to reduce down the sediment and flows coming, you know, into the city of Flagstaff and through those residential areas, Lockup Meadows, those areas as well. You know, there's been some discussion about, well, it hasn't been really tested. Well, for what it was built for, which are the routine typical events, not 200-year events, not 300-year events, it's performed exceptionally well, as did all the measures that we constructed post Schultz. And we mitigated 5 of the watersheds post Schultz, and we had 0 flooding from the time we completed those measures through to this fire. Now this fire, that 7 to 22 times water is just overwhelming those measures, although the measures are still having a tremendous benefit. Those of you that were here and went out into that area and were working with property owners during post Schultz, you'll remember how much devastation there was out there. And yes, this has been impacted, but the corridors that have largely been by far the most impacted are those that were not mitigated. So let me show you another video here, because part of what's happening now, and again, particularly when all the watersheds, but particularly those unmitigated, is that all the on forest areas, those watersheds, what's happening is what we call they're unraveling. There's a tremendous amount of erosion that's going on forest with these events that we've been experiencing. And the actual events themselves have not been, I think literally the largest event we've had to date is a 10-year rainfall event. So that's a very routine, typical event during a monsoon season. So we're getting all this amount of flooding even off of small events. But what we're seeing is that the watersheds above the neighborhoods now have unraveled, and you've seen areas in the next video I want to show you is a prime example of it's the Copeland corridor where that on forest, there were areas up there, we call them alluvial fans, where the water came down, it spread out, it would slow down, drop out its energy, drop out sediment, and reduce down the impacts further down. Well, all those natural fans, both the restored fans and natural fans, now have been eroded through, and they've got channels through them now, deep channels anywhere from 5 to 20, 25 foot deep channels. So they're continually pumping, millions and millions of tons of sediment into the neighborhoods. So let's try this, see if we can get to this one. That was one of the homes. So this is, so this is Copeland. This is being taken from folks that live in this area, and they're taking this from their deck. This actually came under the deck of their home. If you've been out there, it's the Victorian at the corner of Copeland and North Copeland. And you can see how that we call that chocolate water, gold water, literally carrying anywhere upwards of 6 foot wide boulders down, and trees, et cetera, are coming down. And that's the evidence that the watersheds above have unraveled. And so importantly now, what's the plan? How are we going to restore this area and hopefully get to some level of recovery of people's lives? People live with fear. This happens at night. I mean, we've had flooding events at night, and I get videos, people shooting their videos outside their windows on the other side of their barriers, and that water is at the top of the barrier going 30, 40 miles an hour. It's scary. People are living with a lot of fear. And so what the plan is, it's a 3-prong approach. One is we have to get on forest and restore those natural alluvial fans and restore the channels so that they allow the water to spread out, slow down, drop out its energy, drop out the sediment. If we don't do that, anything we construct downstream won't work. It'll just fill up with debris and sediment over and over and over again. So that's the game changer. It was during Schultz. In fact, we have seen virtually no water other than one event. We had a 1,000-year rainfall event in the Brandis corridor in 2018. Beyond that, we didn't see any water leave the forest after we did the forest measures post-Schultz. So these measures have been very, very effective. Again, very effective with museum. We've had some couple of small flows, but they're very effective. They can't solve the problem, and we can't address every, rainfall event. We get large rainfall events, all bets are off. We're still going to see flooding. So this whole, process is built so that you've got this multiple layers of mitigation. So, and then one of the other reasons that the on-forest measures are so important is that where the water's coming out of the forest is changing constantly. Sediment will build up, it'll jump to another tributary, it'll build up there, then it'll jump to another tributary. It's constantly moving. To put mitigation in the neighborhoods, put channels in, detention, you have to have a location where that water's being delivered to. on a, on a consistent basis, so those channels downstream will function. So the second piece, the second prong is getting flood mitigation through the neighborhoods. And in terms of the total overall cost, let me go forward here. That's what that property looked like afterward. We actually went in and harvested this rock to use for mitigation. I can't do work on private property. The county, the city, districts, we cannot do work on private property. That's considered a personal gift. It's illegal. But if it's cost effective for me to like go harvest rock and I don't have to truck it in from Valley or Gray Hill, somewhere way off site, I can show a cost benefit, then I can do some of this type of work. This is in Weepawkee Trails. This home is uninhabitable. He's been out of his house since late June. And that's after the peak of the flooding. As you can see, there's water everywhere else. That's the home, what it looks like pretty much continuously. It was flooded about a little over 2 feet within the home. Super nice family. Really, really sad. That's Seacrest School. This is the west side. That's the west side. This is Highway 89. That just recaptures what we've done to get to long term here. Just gonna scroll through these. This is the overall plan. All those, it's hard to see, I know, but all those blue blobs on the forest is where we're gonna go up and do this work. And we're looking at now, the current figure is about 40 to 45 million just for the on forest work. Off forest, some of the methods that we employ to restore. This is the off forest. We're looking at channels. That's an example. That's a channel the flood control district built about 2 years ago in Mountain Dell. Very similar concrete line channels. We're really increasing the capacity. When we went through Schultz, people really wanted to go more of a natural channel approach. And it just doesn't give us the capacity, nor will it manage the velocities that we're seeing now. So we've applied to NRCS for round 1, 5 watersheds. We've been approved for about $20 million for that. But the total, let me get to the final slide here that shows the total. This is the highway work that's being proposed that we believe is necessary to support both the mitigation and reduce down the impacts to Highway 89 and 180. And that's upwards now 45 to 50 million. So the total summary now, the cost, we've updated it since then. We're at closer to 130 to 135 million up to 150 million for that 3-prong approach. Again, on forest, flood mitigation through the neighborhoods, and then highway drainage improvement. So tremendous effort. We've made our first application for 5 of the watersheds. Those are the 5 of the watersheds that we actually had gotten approval post Schultz. Of those watersheds, we did work in 3 of those watersheds. 2 we did not. The people within those watersheds declined. The 2 that declined were the Copeland area as well as Peaceful Way, which is kind of Kevin's Way area. They declined post Schultz. So, but we're going back to them. In fact, we met with the Copeland area last night. I think there's now very strong interest in moving forward. We're hopeful that they will want to move forward now, and same with Peaceful. We're hopeful that they'll want to move forward and get long-term mitigation now constructed. And then the others we're doing, Weepawkee Trails is being hit really, really hard. And we're increasing the channel there, expanding that channel pretty dramatically. And then the second phase, a second application we're preparing right now to Natural Resources Conservation Service for that government tank corridor. It's extremely complex. It's going to take probably as much cost is probably going to be right now, it's looking like about 30 million, 25 to 30 million just for that one corridor. And we're looking at channels, detention, berms on forest, a number of measures that would contribute to that effort with the goal of reducing and or eliminating water getting into Donny Park. And that's not a guarantee, it's again going to be based on rainfall events. But we're trying to push this as quickly as we can. Then there'll be a third application that'll pick up some additional work that we know we'll need to do, some individual lot mitigation, some work in the paintbrush corridors, which haven't been very hard hit yet. Fortunately, they haven't had too many big rainfall. I've only had like 2 rainfall events in those corridors, but they're still vulnerable, and we're looking at some expansion effort there as well. So this is the worst disaster the county's ever experienced. This will be the biggest federal ask. We're working very closely with Congressman O'Halloran and Senator Cinnamon Kelly. They've been tremendously supportive of us. They're working with us right now. We hope to be able to get on to what's called an emergency supplemental legislation this fall, really coming out of the flooding that occurred in Kentucky. Probably most people are aware of that, wildfires in California. And we've crafted language to go into that bill that would fund the specific programs. It won't necessarily fund our specific projects, but obviously we're also working very closely with the agencies as well that would be funded. And our first application is on the EWPP wait list. So for that, because that program right now, the Emergency Watershed Protection Program through NRCS is not funded. And it's got a backlog of over $600 million worth of projects. So it's all going to come down to funding. People are wondering, well, how quickly can we get this done? One, there will be impacts by construction seasons, weather, just capacity in terms of being able to mobilize this level of construction effort. This will be the biggest construction project ever undertaken in this county, anywhere in this county. And so, but the bottom line right now is we've got to get Congress to approve and appropriate funds to the federal agencies to support this work, because clearly the flood control district doesn't have this kind of money, right? And we'll still probably likely be issuing bonds to be able to, because we'll have to match a fair amount of this funding. We'll have to match, so there'll still be a significant cost to that. But we're trying to hold on desperately to those funds that were dedicated to forest restoration. We can't all afford to do this over and over again. Private property owners can't afford to do this over and over again. Nobody can afford to do this over and over again. So we've got to continue pushing and advancing and advocating for forest restoration. So with that, go ahead and turn it back over to you and let Scott talk about Flagstaff.
Thank you so much. That was a ton of great. For Scott Overton in the city of Flagstaff. Scott, come on up.
Yeah, thank you all. I think last time I spoke with your group, I was an elected official, and boy, I'm glad to be here today, not as an elected official. In all honesty, my name is Scott Overton. I serve as the city's public works director, and there's another element to not only the fire information that you received today, but Lucinda's presentation on post-wildfire flooding. But once these watersheds are destroyed and they are compromised in the city, the urban corridor, the most dense and difficult portions of the watersheds, all of these watersheds funnel into our community. And I think we saw this dramatically happen in 2019 with the museum Spruce Wash. What historically was this giant Dry Lake Hills watershed comes into about a 6-foot wide dry channel that has historically had about 6 feet or 6 cubic feet per second of water, turn into a 1,300 cubic feet per second drainage that runs down through Paradise, Grandview, and through the Sunnyside neighborhood. You all remember the images from last summer on August 17th when we had 3 to 4 feet going down Grandview, and you've now, of course, seen, and your customers have seen the 800,000 sandbags and the miles of barrier. The response is not sustainable. We cannot sweep the street enough. We cannot pick up enough debris. In museum alone, we picked up over 11,000 tons of debris last year, and it took our public works group just over 8 weeks. When people ask me, why are you behind on striping? Why are you behind on signs and on bulky trash pickup? Because we're also responding to these flood events. So it's a difficult balancing act that we're trying to walk. I think with museum, I want to point out a couple key parts. One, Lucinda hit on them. The on-forest work and the alluvial fan work above has really a critical element to whatever we do in the city, because if they can't keep that sediment and that debris and that forest damage as much as possible up on forest, we clean it up out of the underground culverts, we clean it up off the properties, and we're cleaning it up off the streets and right of ways. In addition to those efforts, we in the city have started to engineer with some of the brightest minds, and I'm sincere about that. Some of the brightest engineering minds in our community are working this problem daily. And you've seen the large detention basins at Killip School go in. You know, that was an effort to coordinate with the school district. We saw an opportunity, put in 2 large detention basins that could double as fields for the future FUSD school site at Killip. Those store about 8 acre-feet of water. The engineer groups have told us that if they had the similar flood event to what we had last August 17th, they would fill in 6 minutes. So that puts it in perspective. To Lucinda's point, you can't fix the problem. You can mitigate to a degree, and you can do as best as possible. We may never be able to engineer our way out of this. We have some simple preliminary design work that's now being completed. You're going to see a question on your ballot in November about bonded questions to try to continue mitigation work on the museum spruce wash. You'll see a question for $26 million, and that will address Cedar Avenue crossing, Linda Vista crossing, a set of basins at the Wedge property to the west of the Safeway Shopping Center, and some more stream and channel work between each improvement, and then a very large improvement, what we call the Arroyo Seco Inlet. It's a really important question to understand, to get more information about, and to learn about, because the reality is, when you fill up the basins in 6 minutes, we still have to get the water there. And we've just continue to have this challenge through that neighborhood and that most urban core. Switching gears a little bit to the Pipeline West, that was a new event for us, of course, this year in the city limits. It enters city limits just south of Fire Station 5, right at Highway 180. Intervenes a kind of a low-lying bathtub situation, completely different than Spruce Wash. And to Stavana Way and Upper Coconino Estates, all that water is trying to find its way to the Rio de Flag. We did respond to 4 separate events on that one this season. Fairly disruptive to your lives. It closes 180, the only access we have north of town without going to Williams. Impacts a school site with Secret School right there directly adjacent to that. And then, of course, complete havoc throughout that neighborhood. What we quickly recognized was we learned lessons at Schultz. We learned lessons in museum. And if we can find a way to start some long-term mitigations as quickly as possible, let's start solving the problem as best as possible now. So you will see, and if you have not seen it yet, up towards Mount Eldon Lookout Road and the Y at Schultz Pass Road, there's a very, very large detention basin project that is underway. We're in week 3. It will be done next week. 4-week project. We are thankful for the funding and the support from the Flood Control District and NRCS. $2.4 million project on city property. It was an open space parcel. We took 16 acres and converted it to 3 very, very large detention basins. The whole goal, hold the water, but more importantly, it will release it a little bit more effectively, but it's sediment. Now, any debris we hope can capture in some of these detention basins, slow that release into that neighborhood and manage it to a degree. I think what's really key, and we're all going to have to keep in mind, is it doesn't solve the problem. We still have to continue to work on those conveyances from those detention basins across 180 all the way to the Rio de Flag main channel. As was mentioned earlier, Schultz Creek is one tributary of the Rio de Flag watershed, which is about 57 square miles. Focus has to be on forest health. If we have a catastrophic wildfire on the west side and we burn all 57 square miles, it's kind of a game over situation. We don't like to model it. We don't like to think about it, but we need to. We need to understand it, and we've got to pay attention to it. Schultz Creek, one watershed, 25% of it burned. Pretty high severity, but look at the damage it's doing in the 180 corridor. So really important to pay attention to those as well. On the response side, it's an all-out effort. You see street sweepers, you see loaders, you see equipment, you see 7-day response. It's exhausting and it's really tough to get it done. Certainly not a plea or a beg to you, but I will tell you, as you see those sandbag walls and those residents that are impacted, our goal is to try to get their lives somewhat back to normal in some amount of time. But it is a long game. It is a marathon, and we will live this way for quite some time once the watershed has been compromised. They go hand in hand. I think you saw some great information today, some great videos, just some great examples of how these are all interrelated and intertwined. I'm going to stop there and let all of you have questions. I know I can cover urban environment, Lucinda can cover county, and of course, Vic, you've got the national forest covered. So again, thank you for your time, and it's a really important community conversation. We appreciate the platform. We'll hear in the drone.
We've got one person asking 2 questions online.
Oh.
Did most of those homeowners have flood insurance?
I think a fairly significant number of people had retained their flood insurance from Schultz out in the Schultz flood area. Quite a few people retained their flood insurance. And we every year we send out what's called a flood advisory before monsoon season. And we strongly encourage people to purchase flood insurance. I'll be honest with you, I don't think, irrespective of what flood zone you're in per FEMA, in this environment with monsoons, everyone should have flood insurance. Unless you are very much at the very top of some hill somewhere, you need flood insurance. You really should have flood insurance. And in most areas, it's within what most would consider a reasonable amount of money. We're seeing more, the private market in flood insurance is really taken off, I'll say, and we've seen costs go up. Particularly in the more urbanized area within the city, that's been the case. But in nothing to do necessarily with the post-wildfire flooding, in fact, nothing to do with it. If you're interested, on the county's website, I believe it's on the city's flood website, our Schultz pipeline website, it's got a tremendous amount of information. But on there too, we had the Region 9 National Flood Insurance Program expert here. I think she was here, but a virtual meeting that's been recorded. If you want to understand more about what's happening with flood insurance, I encourage you to listen to that.
For follow-up question, does any of that water is it sent to a place where it can be used, like Luncheon?
Most of this water all finds its way to the Rio de Flag, Little Colorado River on the east. So it just goes into the natural aquifer, some of it unknown, underground groundwater supply.
It goes underground. To date, it has not reached the Rio on the east side, and we don't want it to, because if it does, it becomes an Army Corps water of the U.S., and then it adds a whole other layer of bureaucracy, which we were successful in. It took us a year and a half, but we avoided it post-Schultz. So yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me the biggest difference between private and flood insurance?
I don't really have that expertise. I would really encourage you to go on. It's Edie Lohman is our Region 9 expert, and I would encourage you to go on. I don't know enough about it to understand. They put a whole new rating system in place in the last 2 years, and it's been I don't think it's affecting like those that are actually in special flood hazard areas. So no, nothing on the east side is special flood hazard area. The only special flood hazard area that's been impacted so far is I think a small part of the museum was a 500-year, and then the immediate Rio area is a special flood hazard area. The rest are not, but they use zones, and they rate the zones through some computer process back east, and frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but we don't manage or control it. That's all controlled out of a single federal program. So, yes, sir.
Is your presentation on the county website?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, this is the August 17th that was shared with the federal representatives that were here, and I'll say we were fortunate. We took them on a tour. And it dumped out on the east side, and they got to see what it felt like to be out there and watch those channels rage. And we barely got out of the Bukkake trails. We were going around the loop, and it was a real eye opener for them. And it was interesting because those that you would think would have an understanding of what the flooding looked like locally, didn't. Like, for example, frankly, the Forest Service people that were with us, they were like, oh my God, we had no idea it was this bad. And so it was a real eye opener. Many, Congressman O'Halloran's been out there at least probably 8 times with us, and he's been there right after, he's been there during, he's seen it all, and he really is a big champion for us. So
I still don't know how you coordinated the weather with the
I
tour.
know, yeah, no, it was
It was well done.
fortunate or unfortunate.
It was well
yes,
done.
ma'am.
And Jerome had a question too.
Today about the business measures, and I think we all appreciate that. But the question came back from clients and friends and neighbors is, when the weather's really hot and dry and windy in April and May, and that seems to be kind of a new pattern. Why are we closing or canceling if the Forest Service can close the forest? So that at least if people are being sure the sun is supposed to out. But you can feel inside the forest and there's a person in the vehicle, the further they can go up into the forest to the wilderness area, which makes, if the fire starts in there, it's much harder to reach and address for the Forest Service in the county. And so that's the question I keep hearing. The question is my mind is, why are we closing the forest to just access in, say, April, May, when it's like this year, when the forest was just sitting dry, it was absolutely firecracker dry, and it was super windy and hot. And we know it's like there's this match between and so that's kind of this
We'll let him answer. I will say on behalf of the county, that we've had, I'll say, very robust communication with the Forest Service about increasing the closures and, acting more on that side, I'll say, of the ledger than the other side. So now, we look at what is the impact to the economy, what's the impact to people's personal. Many people, you all know better than most, their home is their asset, right? They're using their number one asset in their lives, right? And now they either lost it through fire or they lost it now through flooding, or devastated the value of their properties dramatically, right? So we're definitely advocating for stricter processes to restrict access, and we've been a huge advocate for additional law enforcement. They need, and we try to support that with some of the deputies as well, but they need more law enforcement resources as well. And we've been advocating with our congressional members for that. And there was a pretty good increase, or some level of increase did come through, a couple of the bills that have been passed in the last 2 years. So, well, let him answer, because that's really a Forest Service question.
So the decision to go into campfire smoking restrictions, and then of course leading all the way up to area closures and full forest closure, has always been a science-based decision based on dryness. We call them energy release component is the metric. And generally speaking, what that means is when we get to that point where we're at the driest 10% of the year, ERC is above 90%. That is when we flip that switch. Now, I'll let you know that our forest supervisor, Laura Jo West, who has to make that hard call every year, she just retired. And a big part of that retirement decision was where she gets from the community, because she has 50% of the community screaming, we need to close the forest. And she has 50% of the community saying, no, this is our national forest. We belong here. So that's a really tough decision. It is science-based. It does get closed. And right around the time of these big fires, that's when we were going into forest closures. It's always been illegal to have a campfire in the city, yet we've had the Schultz fire. We've had people go, that break the law, so to speak. So that is a tough one. But, we have a tourist economy here in Flagstaff, and so that's part of the resistance to it. But it's a really tough decision because about half the community wants it closed, if not year-round, certainly for 2 or 3 months, and the other half of the community does not want it closed. It's our national forest, and so that is a tough one. I see your point, but there's definitely two sides to it.
Sorry, just to be respectful of everybody's time, I don't think we have time for any other questions.
I was just gonna ask, how can we get all this information? Is it on the websites?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And is that the best thing to share with our
Yes.
clients in future?
Absolutely. The flood maps are on there, a lot of information is on there.
And it's separate, county and city have each.
They're all linked,
They're all linked.
but the
Yeah,
county one's
and,
best.
and there's a email address on there, pipeline fire flood. And you, if you have a question you want to email, you can email that email, send us an email. We also are doing routine emails, both the city and the district, flood control district are doing emails out to those within the flood area. And if you have clients that you would encourage them to sign up for that, that's the information that's coming out the most frequently, and you can sign up. It's not restricted just to property owners. You're welcome to sign up again. You use that email, tell us you want to be added, and we'll add you to the list.
So yeah, please, thank you again.
That's it, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you at the next one.